Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're comparing the gaming performance of two entry-level graphics cards. One is the Intel Arc A310 and the other is Nvidia's GTX 1630. Both of these cards have 4GB of GDDR6 VRAM and both sit at the lowest position within their respective product tiers, Alchemist and GeForce 16. The A310 runs entirely on PCIe slot power and seems to consume up to around 40 watts, at least according to my tests today. The 1630 requires a single 6-pin power connector and is a little thirstier, but it's still a very low power card compared to most of what's on the market these days. Now I've paired both of these with an i5-12400F and 32GB of RAM. Resizable bar is enabled, which is a must for any Arc card, and this is worth bearing in mind when viewing the following results. I'll probably make a separate video at some point highlighting the performance differences between enabling and disabling rebar. This is very much a best case scenario side by side showcase. So let's get into some games. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a tough one here, Alan Wake 2. Both of these cards don't really have a hope of running this game smoothly. I noticed that the road textures seem to be, well, a little bit missing on the Arc A310, or at least they look a bit sharper with the GeForce card. The performance is also slightly better on the Arc GPU. We're using the latest version of the drivers for both cards. Neither of these results are what I would call playable, to be honest, not without some form of upscaling, but as I normally do with these side-by-side comparisons, I've kept everything at native resolution, and that is 1080p in today's video. To be honest, it's a better experience than I thought it would be for both GPUs, but we couldn't quite hit the 30 FPS marker at native. Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077, and here the Intel Arc A310 pulled ahead by about 10 frames per second across the board, so not just in terms of the average, but also in terms of the 1 and 0.1% lows, and the game did feel a lot smoother, not just to run here with the benchmark test, but also to play. It's also worth noting the power consumption. Yet again, the Arc is around about 40 watts here, and the GTX 1630 is peaking at just over 60, so that's what I meant when I say this is still a very low power card in comparison to everything else. But let's not forget that the Arc A310 doesn't require a power connector either. Now you may notice at some points that the VRAM says higher than it actually is in terms of the allocation. It's over 4GB here and the card only has 4GB. Seems to be a thing with Arc cards, so just focus on the usage/process figure instead. So we have Fallout 4 next. This is an older title, but I wanted to throw it back into the benchmarks because it's regained some sort of popularity since the Fallout TV show, of course, and being an older game, it's interesting to see how it runs not just on the Arc card, but the GTX 1630 as well. I was expecting worse performance on the Intel GPU, but we saw 56 FPS at the high preset, with a 1% low of 37 and a 0.1% low of 22, so it's not without its problems, that's for sure, but it certainly did better than the GTX card here, which came in with an average of 51, but a 1% low of 33 and a 0.1% low of 15. So there were also some stutters here and there with this one. The game is definitely playable on both cards, but I'd probably recommend sticking to a lower preset, and that's not something I would have expected to say considering Fallout 4 came out on PC in 2015. Now when it comes to Forza Horizon 5, and just like in Cyberpunk actually, the Arc A310 pulled ahead by about 10 frames per second, not just in terms of the average figure, but the percentile lows as well, so the 1% low and the 0.1% low figures were much improved with the Intel Arc A310. I also want to take this opportunity to mention temperatures. Both cards run pretty cool and both of them are actually very quiet as well. I mentioned before about the Palette GTX 1630, just because I don't like the card as an actual GPU doesn't mean I can't like the card itself. And as with a lot of these palette designs, I think it looks great and it runs nice and cool and nice and quiet. To be honest, the same could be said for the Arc card. I like the blue theme. this is the first Sparkle card that I've seen in years, so it's nice to see them back on the market, and it's a nice compact card for smaller systems. In terms of the 1630, you're going to get similar or better performance from an older GTX 1050 Ti, and if you're considering an ARC A310, well, it may also be worth considering what other used options are out there too, because you may find something more powerful for less money, although maybe not something that's going to consume as little power as this. All the games that had a built-in benchmark I ran, so Red Dead Redemption 2 here. When it comes to the performance figures, well, this was about 10 FPS on average difference, again falling in favour of the ARC GPU. Those 1.1% figures were also improved on Intel's card. Overall, it was pretty consistent for both cards in Saint Denis here. Neither is going to hit a 60 FPS average, not with the ultra textures anyway. I did leave everything else at low, but if you want to try and target, say, 60, then you're probably going to need some help from FSR, which is available in the game's menu. Now, what's a GPU benchmark without the very demanding Starfield? Both of these cards actually did as well as each other. I shouldn't really say as well as each other, or as bad as each other here. I think the 4 gigs of VRAM was more of a limitation than anything for Starfield, as the results were very similar. 18 FPS on average, a 1% lower 15 for the A310, 14 for the GTX 1630, and a 14 FPS figure for that 0.1% low for the ARC card, and 13 for the GTX 1630. So really not much difference at all, unless we employ some form of upscaling in order to try and squeeze 30 FPS from it. We're not going to see anywhere near that number, and in order to actually get near that, we do have to make some pretty hefty sacrifices, as you probably saw in my ARC A310 initial review, which was uploaded a few days ago. To finalise then, we have The Witcher 3 1080p with a medium preset here, SSAO, SSR low, TAAU. The ARC once again pulled ahead. I think this is definitely the better card, at least with rebar enabled, but as I said before, I will be disabling it, comparing it to itself with rebar enabled, and also comparing it to the GTX 1630 as well as possibly the RX 6400 to see where it stands in the grand scheme of things. Now the 1630 hit 41 FPS on average here in comparison to the A310's 49, and the percentile figures were also quite a bit worse. So if you're looking to decide between the 1630 and the ARC A310, then the ARC is definitely the better GPU in most, if not all, cases, but I'm sure there will be a few outliers here and there, as there normally are with benchmarks like this. Now, to be honest, as I said before, there are probably better used options for very similar money, cards that are going to get you a lot more performance for this sort of price tag, but if you're looking for something new and doesn't consume a lot of power, you don't have a 6-pin power connector to spare, the ARC A310s isn't really that bad at all. I'd like to see it a little bit cheaper. It was about £120 here in the UK. I've seen other models for $99 in the US, which does sound a lot more tempting, and there are also some low profile variants as well, which may make them ideal for smaller form factor machines. I hope this comparison has been helpful, and if not, I hope it's at least been interesting to those of you watching. Leave your thoughts and comments down below, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one. Thanks for watching.